Hi everyone, thanks for clicking on the video first of all apologies that it's taken so long to get episode 3 of My Scootering Journey posted up to YouTube. Happy New Year to everyone, by the way. We've had Christmas in the new year. It was corresponded with myself and my partner having a nasty dose of the flu, which basically floored us for 2 or 3 weeks. So that combined with everything else that goes on this time of year has just delayed me doing videos and things. So apologies for that. But here we are, episode 3 of My Scootering Journey. And it's a short and very sad story, because this is the story of the Piaggio B125. Now, if you've watched the previous 2 episodes, you'll know that roughly 20 years ago rather, not 10 years, 20 years ago, I decided that scootering was going to be a cheap and effective way of getting from A to B. I lived in Fife in Dunfermline in Scotland, and I had to get into Edinburgh every day, and even for a while I was working back shift as well. So the buses weren't very practical, and I'd hit upon the idea of scootering. And I bought myself a little Indian 50cc, the Piaggio Spirit, which was, for what it was pretty good. But I only had that 2 or 3 months when I quickly decided that something a bit more powerful was needed for the roads that I was commuting on. So part 2 of the story, you'll know I got myself an Adley Supersonic, which a local garage happened to have, a 125, a great scooter. And I had that roughly a year. So we're looking around about 2004 at this point. And I decided that obviously scootering was absolutely for me. I loved it. I loved the bikes. I loved everything that went with them. It wasn't a passing fad or anything. But I decided then that I wanted to get myself something from a big brand. A big brand, what I imagine would be a well-made bike. Now, there was nothing wrong with the previous 2 bikes I'd had, but there was no dealer backup. There was nothing like that at all. Certainly not for the Piaggio and not really for the Adley either. Now, local bike garages were prepared to work on them. That was fine. But you know, it wasn't ideal. There wasn't a service schedule or anything like that. You know, you really just had to run with it, and if there was a problem, you went to the garage. So I wanted a big brand. I wanted a dealership network. I wanted parts availability. I wanted all that. So as it happened in Dunfermline, there was in a nearby town a Piaggio dealership, motorcycle dealership. Now, it wasn't just a motorcycle dealership. They did garden machinery, garden equipment, that sort of thing, which maybe should have run an alarm bell with me or two at the time, but it didn't really. At the time I saw, we're a Piaggio dealer, we sell motorbikes and scooters, great. That's handy for me. And also, having been browsing through Twist and Go magazine, a bike I really liked the look of was the Piaggio B125. Now, this was a much bigger bodied scooter than anything I'd had in the past, and it also had bigger wheels, which I really liked the look of because bigger wheels tend to give you a smoother ride, and both the Piaggio and the Adley had quite small titchy wheels. And I mean, I'm 6'2" and, you know, fairly substantial, and I thought, well, bigger wheels are going to give me a smoother ride. It's a more comfy seat, it's a bigger bodied bike, it looks fantastic, and it's going to have this great dealership network, and it's going to be a trusted motor, a trusted brand, the whole lot. Fantastic. So anyway, I went down to the local dealership and had a chat with them and decided to go ahead and order it. And this wasn't a cheap scooter at the time. This was, I think now, I don't remember the exact price, but it was over £2,000 anyway, which, you know, for 19 years or so ago was a fairly substantial chunk of money. I think it must have been between 2 and 2.5. I can't remember exactly. I don't have any information on it still there that lets me check, but it'd be round about that anyway. So, waited a while, and eventually the dealership got the bike delivered and did the prep and everything, and this was very exciting. I'd sold the Adley on to a guy from Glasgow who'd come and bought it. You can hear about that in the previous video. And I had to go down one day and collect the B125, and it was a lovely looking bike. And I have to say, with the possible exception of the bike I have now, which is the Aprilia SRGT, it was the most comfortable scooter I've ever ridden. It was absolutely lovely to ride. The problems were then started, and the problems started almost straight away. The following day from when I picked it up, I was ready to do my commutes to work, and I found it difficult to start. And then it started doing something that was actually very dangerous. It had this habit of stalling as you pulled out of junctions. Now, you can imagine, at the time I lived on a minor road and I was coming out that into a major road. Now, if you're turning onto that and the bike suddenly for no reason stalls underneath you, that's not a good thing to happen. That's very dangerous. So anyway, I put up with this for a few days, and I thought, nah, there's something wrong here. So I took it back down to the dealer. He changed the spark plug, played around with it, but he couldn't get it to do the stalling that I was experiencing. And I remember actually picking it up again, taking it home, and on the way home, it did it again. And I thought, nah, I don't like this at all. Now, in those days, of course, there was no fuel injection, or not in scooters anyway, that I was buying. And one of the issues that I read about was carb icing, which can happen, apparently, if it's very cold and you're trying to start the carburetor, ice or something forms, and it can cause problems with starting. And one of the solutions to that was a chemical compound called Silcoline Pro FST, which you add to the fuel, just a small amount, and it helps with carb icing. So I thought, well, let's try that. So I tried that, and it worked okay. It did help, to be fair, but it wasn't really ideal. I mean, you spent a lot of money on this fancy Piaggio scooter, this great heritage brand, and you're going to have to add stuff to the engine to get it to work on a cold day in Scotland. Not ideal. So anyway, we persevered. I persevered for a bit longer with this, and there was a guy I remember on the Twist and Go forum who ran a big Piaggio dealership down south, and he was very helpful. He gave some tips and advice, but the engine in the bike at the time was a Leader engine. Now this was supposed to be a bulletproof engine, very reliable, and this guy always said, if the engine's set up right, you won't have a problem with it. But anyway, we carry on. So I carried on for another couple of weeks after that, and bear in mind I'd only had the bike about 3 weeks by this point, and went into town one day on my commute, as I normally do, and while I was at work, it absolutely poured with rain. It hammered down rain. It was a really, a nasty day. Came out of work in the evening, and the bike was dead. Would not start at all, wouldn't do anything. To the point where I actually had to phone a breakdown company to come. Now, by this point, I was that cheesed off with it. The breakdown guy said, do you want me to take it to your home? I said, no, I don't want you to take it to my home. We're going to take it to the dealership, and I'm going to dump it right outside his front door. And that's what we did. We dropped the bike off at the dealership right in front of his front door, and home I went, because by this time it was, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So, of course, phoned the dealership the next morning, very apologetic about the whole thing, to be fair. But, that didn't really help me. And to cut a long story short, that was really the last I had of the bike. The dealer claimed that he'd had 3 different spares or parts of engines delivered from Piaggio, and every one of them was faulty. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. My personal opinion with this is either the bike was faulty from the word go, or it just hadn't been set up properly. And it's possible that because it was a dealership, but it also dealt with a lot of other stuff, garden equipment, that sort of thing. It wasn't specifically a motorcycle dealership. And I think maybe it just didn't have the expertise to set the bike up properly in the first place and then deal with any problems we had. So anyway, the bottom line is I had the bike about a month. It was nothing but trouble. It gave me nothing but grief, although it was a beautiful bike to ride. And of course now I have an Aprilia, which is part of the Piaggio setup. So I'm kind of back with them again after all these years for the first time. And so far I have to say I've had no issues with the SRGT. It's been a fantastic bike. It's been at all weathers, all temperatures, no problems. But then of course in these days we have fuel injected engines, and that's going to help with a lot of these things. So there we go. The Piaggio B125 really cheesed me off for a long, long time with the name of Piaggio. I wasn't going to touch another one of their bikes, which was maybe unfair, but that's the way I felt. So anyway, did the whole horrible experience with the Piaggio B125 put me off scootering? No, it didn't. What it did do was make me switch to Honda. And the next episode is the Honda Dylan. And that, to this day, probably remains the best, most reliable scooter I have ever owned. So coming up in the next episode is the story of the Honda Dylan, which I still have a very soft spot for after all these years. Anyway guys, thanks for watching as always. Any comments, any hints, suggestions, by all means drop me a line if you've had any similar experiences, or maybe you've had a Piaggio B125 for years and it's been fantastic, in which case you're very lucky because it's a great bike and potentially it could have been brilliant. But for me, it certainly wasn't. Okay, thanks anyway, guys, for watching. As I say, appreciate all your comments and likes and your subscriptions and things. Much appreciated. Thanks as always, and I shall see you on the next video for episode 4 of my scootering journey, which is the Honda Dylan.